Welcome back to the Operation Freedom YouTube channel. What we do here is shine the light of truth on the deep state. They hate that. We do it figuratively with our presentations. We do it literally with our sponsor's product, PatriotLegacy.com. PatriotLegacy.com, featured product of theirs, the Patriot Beacon. 6 overall lighting functions. In addition, solar powered, don't need batteries. You can charge your other devices like your phone from it. In addition, you got a compass, you got a window breaking hammer, and you got a seatbelt cutter. Plus, if those deep state dweebs get just a little bit too close to you, blast them with this. They're gone. Go to patrioticlegacy.com, patrioticlegacy.com. Get yourself, your kids, your grandkids, your car. Can carry it with you anytime. Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to Operation Freedom Briefings. The goal of these briefings and my weekly radio show, Operation Freedom, is to provide you information the bought-off, lamestream, fake media will not present or will not touch. I'm broadcasting today from, our accessory freedom bunker. And I'm also broadcasting to you from the largest POW camp in North America. And that would be the state of Michigan, under the auspices of someone I've called remember Hogan's Heroes and Colonel Klink, the incompetent overseer of Stalag 13? Well, the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, I've labeled her Colonel Klink Whitmer. She is the incompetent overseer of the state of Michigan and has placed every citizen in Michigan in essentially a POW camp. And the reason why I think it's important to call attention to her incompetence and her actions and her lack of actions in some respects is because every governor in the United States is watching her and what she can get away with and what type of pushback she gets. So I believe it is important that we focus on what she is doing so you have a clue in your particular state. And when you start seeing some of these things happen in your state, you get ahead of the game and you call out your governor and you call out your state legislature as they try to strip your freedoms and your liberties, which has occurred to every citizen in the state of Michigan over the past couple months. The title of today's presentation is Politics, Medicine, and let's call her Typhoid Whitmer, or maybe Corona Gretchen. I want to take you back in time. I want to take you back in time to the late 1800s, early 1900s. As I mentioned before, my mom was a history teacher. And many times what we find in historical research, actually we say, wow, that's like what's happening right now. Well, I want to tell you a story about a little history, about an individual by the name of Mary Mallon. She was quite well known in New York social circles and in the elite circles in New York at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. And the reason why she was well known is because she was known to be one of the top cooks or chefs in New York for wealthy families. She was I guess the equivalent today would be somebody like well-known in the culinary circles, Emeril Lagasse, Bobby Flay, prior Julia Child. She was extremely well-known, and she had been the cook or the chef for a number of New York families. Her specialties were, in particular, where she was well known for reportedly, were her desserts, and in particular, her peach ice cream. But she was also known for something else, and that was her poor hygiene, actually. She would never wash her hands no matter what she did. Yet, the elite families still hired her. And she was very sought after. But starting in 1900, and culminating in 1906, it turned out, when all was said and done, that Mary Mallon and her peach ice cream and her other desserts and other food she prepared for wealthy families, she in fact infected 51 people with typhoid. Of the 51 people, 3 resulted in death. It's interesting, the city of New York hired a sanitation engineer, a guy by the name of George Soper, to investigate what was happening to these elite families. They're getting sick. They're getting typhoid. What's the common denominator? And in fact, the New York Health Department, through George Soper, determined that it was Mary Mallon. That she was the one with typhoid, and she was passing it on through her poor hand washing and poor hygiene. So she was isolated. She was quarantined. Now let's get a couple things straight. They keep saying that, people across the country, they're being quarantined. Now let me tell you the medical definition of quarantine. It's when you find someone who's ill and you isolate them. Just what happened here in the early 1900s to Mary Mallon with typhoid, so-called Typhoid Mary. That's quarantine. What's happening here in the United States? Yeah, there's some evidence. There's some issues and some people that are being quarantined that are found to have coronavirus, and they are isolated and they are isolated for a period of time until their symptoms resolve. After 14 days, then they're allowed to go about their business. In Michigan, the business is you can't go anywhere. But for example, what's happening here in Michigan, what's happening throughout the country, is these shelter-in-place orders of healthy people that are not infected or that have been infected and are clear of infection and are asymptomatic. What's really happening to all of us is we're under house arrest. The bought-off lamestream fake media owned and operated by the deep state know this. Actually, they're proud of it. The deep state is proud of it. The citizens of this country, for the most part, are not being quarantined like Mary Mallon, but they're actually under house arrest. They don't want to let you know that. Why? Because if you really knew that's what was happening to you and your family and your loved ones, well, you just might get upset. And you just might hold the deep state's political puppets' feet to the fire. And let's face it, they all have R's and D's after their names. One political party, as I've outlined before, called the Republicans, owned and operated by the deep state. So that must have been the end of the story with Typhoid Mary Mallon, right? Infected 51 people with typhoid, 3 died, elite families. She was put under quarantine, and that's pretty much the end of the story. Well, actually, no, it's not. She was isolated. And then around 1915, she actually violated her isolation. What'd she do? She actually went to be a cook and a chef, you can imagine this, at Manhattan's Sloan Maternity Hospital. Right. Well, the New York Public Health Department then realized, wait a minute, this is this Mary Mallon again. But they didn't realize it until 25 workers also became ill with typhoid and 2 died. It wasn't documented how many patients ended up getting sick and how many died. But she was placed back in isolation. Why do I bring this story up? Well, she knowingly had this disease, typhoid. And through her own self-serving attitude and basically incompetence, She wreaked havoc in New York. Led to a number of people getting ill and a number of people dying. It was all about her. She put her interests ahead of the public. And in the process, people were harmed. People died. I believe if we look at that example of Typhoid Mary, we have our own version of Typhoid Mary, someone that I have called Typhoid Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, or Corona Gretchen, however you want to refer to her. The reason why I say that is because she put her own interests, her own political future, ahead of the citizens of Michigan, and in the process harmed the citizens of Michigan, and in fact, in harming the citizens of Michigan, have the potential to harm every American citizen. Let me take you through a timeline of what happened here in Michigan. And it's important for you to look at your own state and what's happening. So let's go back a couple months. January 31st, 2020, the United States Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar declared a public health emergency for coronavirus. Okay. He encouraged states to take the necessary steps and precautions to protect their population. Well, what did Typhoid Whitmer, Corona Gretchen do? Well, a couple things at that point. On February 3rd, 2020, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services activated the Community Health Emergency Coordination Center. All right. February 28th, activated the State Emergency Operations Center. Okay. On March 3rd, created 4 task forces about coronavirus. Okay. What happened with all that? Not a thing. Why? Because Typhoid Whitmer, Corona Gretchen, was too busy looking at her political future. She has now tied her political future to Joe Biden. You see, the Michigan primary was March 10th. She heavily campaigned for Joe Biden in large public events. Where? In Detroit, in Dearborn. 2 places that 2 weeks later would become hotspots. She campaigned in churches in Detroit, early part of March. She was so busy campaigning that she actually neglected her duties as governor to the people. She was campaigning for not just Joe Biden. Her goal was to get him across the finish line so that this would finish off Bernie Sanders, which it ultimately did, with Biden winning the March 10th primary in Michigan. But her goal was for Biden to consider her for the number 2 spot. She put her own political future ahead of doing what was right for the citizens of Michigan. And you need to ask that same question about your governor and your legislature. And if you come to the same conclusion that all of us have in Michigan, that this political hack, Typhoid Whitmer, cared more about herself than the people of Michigan and their health and welfare, just like Typhoid Mary did back in the early 1900s, well, then you need to step up. And you need to call your governor and your legislators that aren't doing the job. You need to hold their feet to the fire. You see, on March 4th, while she was too busy campaigning for Joe Biden, it turns out that FEMA, of the federal government, approved $14.5 million for Michigan assistance to stem off the coronavirus potential outbreak. to buy personal protective equipment, to make sure there were enough ventilators. Did she do that? She was too busy campaigning for Joe Biden. In order to get that $14.5 million, you have to file, the state government, the governor has to file a disaster declaration. Did she do that on March 4th? After FEMA and the Trump administration put $14.5 million on the table to do what was needed to take care of the people of Michigan? Did she file those forms on March 4th? No. She was too busy campaigning. There were a number of folks, including the former Secretary of State in Michigan, that said, this primary on March 10th, this shouldn't happen. The virus is spreading across the country. You're going to expose the poll workers who are mainly senior citizens, who appear to be vulnerable from this virus. You're going to expose them. You're going to bring people out into spaces that, are too confined, too congested. Did she postpone the primary? Oh, no. Why? Because it's all about her. Gretchen Whitmer. Yeah, Typhoid Whitmer. Corona Gretchen's future as possible in the number 2 slot on the Biden ticket. Frankly, we talk about the road to the White House. A Biden-Whitmer ticket is not a road to the White House. It's a road to nowhere. But she campaigned heavily for Biden. Huge, big crowds in Detroit, in Dearborn. Potentially exposing all those people to harm's way down the line. The primary happened on March 10th. Joe Biden won. She did her job. And as soon as Joe Biden won, guess who he started to speak about as a potential number 2 on his ticket? That's right. Typhoid Whitmer, Corona Gretchen. 2 hours after the polls closed on March 10th, the deep state puppet, Typhoid Whitmer, guess what she did? She declared a state of emergency in the state of Michigan. Why didn't she do it earlier that day? Well, if she did, she couldn't get Joe across the finish line. And he wouldn't consider her for the number 2 spot, right? No. She let that primary happen for her own political expediency. And then the next week, in the state data that started to come out, and it started to show a ramp up in the number of cases in Michigan. Guess what happened? Her and her Department of Public Health and her administration deep sixed data for the public to see about how many people were tested and how many people were actually found to be negative. One of the reasons why they wanted to deep six that data is because, it showed that the testing that was occurring, that was being sent to the state lab, was taking a week to come back. In fact, the state lab, not the federal lab, the state lab under her jurisdiction was sending the tests that were obtained to Idaho to get done because they were so overwhelmed at the state lab in Michigan. And then to California, it was taking a week to come back. I heard that from many of my friends who are still in the front line of healthcare delivery in Michigan. It would take a week to get a test result back about coronavirus on a patient. Why? Not because of the feds, but because of the state lab. And then she started deep sixing that information. And then on March 23rd, she declared the first stay-at-home order, the first house arrest order. She based it on data from the Imperial College, which has found to be fraudulent. Completely bogus. So why did she base her decision on house arrest for every citizen of Michigan? Because she knew what was coming. Because anyone in infectious disease will tell you, when you look at coronavirus, you look at what occurred in a community 2 weeks before. And you can anticipate if there's going to be a surge, there's going to be a surge exactly 2 weeks later. And on March 24th, the day after the first lockdown order in Michigan occurred, guess what happened? The surge started. I started hearing from my friends in the 4 largest medical centers in Southeast Michigan that a huge number of people were coming in and really sick. And yeah, the vast majority of the people that were getting really sick had underlying medical conditions: obesity, diabetes, underlying lung or pulmonary disease, underlying cardiovascular disease. You see, the reason why she issued the stay-at-home order is because she was aware there was going to be a surge. That stay-at-home order was not based on the fraudulent data from the Imperial College, which she initially stated. It was because she knew she allowed, just as Typhoid Mary exposed people willingly to typhoid, she willingly exposed the population to Michigan to the coronavirus in large groups because of her campaigning and her not stopping the primary on March 10th. Hence, Typhoid Whitmer, Corona Gretchen.